Hello and welcome to another session in the Spark series. So generally we have different environments. We start with your dev environment. We do all our coding here. So this is our dev environment. And once we do the coding, we promote it to different environments. Let's say we have a QA environment here. And then we also have, let's say, a UAT environment and then a production environment. So we have four different environments here. So this is your UAT and this is your production. So what happens is we do all the coding here first in the development. We do all the coding, we test the data, we test our code, and then once everything is set, we deploy this code to QA and do the testing here and everything. And once this is done, what we do is we promote it to UAT, to the user acceptance testing here, and then finally we move it into production. So this is the life cycle, right? Now when we talk about parameterizing, right, or let's say the file name. So maybe in dev we might get files in some location. Let's say I get here in user Cloudera, there's a folder called as dev, and here I get the file, right? But in QA this might be different. So I might get this file here in Cloudera, and there might be another folder called as QA, and then here I might get the file. Now, and similarly for UAT I might have different paths. So this can be UAT here, and also for prod it could be similar different path, right? So we have different paths here, right, in dev, QA and UAT. So while you parameterizing, right, when you give the Spark submit, you give this as one of the arguments, that is from your last example, right? So one of the arguments is that we pass the file location. So if you're running in dev, you have to pass this location, but then when you're promoting this code in QA, this will not work, right? Your Spark submit will not work, right? So in that scenario you need to change the Spark submit to provide this argument, and similarly for UAT you have to provide this argument, and for prod you have to provide this argument, right? So your code, your Spark submit is not consistent between different environments. I mean, your program and everything is same, but then the location of the file will be different. So every time you promote, you have to make that extra effort to make sure that you are changing the location in different environments, right? So this is one way how you can deploy this code and run in different environments. But however, there is a better way of doing things. So what if I have the same Spark submit, I just have one Spark submit. So this, whatever Spark submit that I have, so this could be my Spark submit, and now if it runs in dev, it should automatically pick up this folder, right? If it runs in QA, it should automatically pick up this folder. If it runs in UAT, it should automatically pick up this folder, and if it runs in production, it should pick up this folder. So based on the environment where it is running, it should pick up any of these folders, right? So this way you don't have to make any changes to your Spark submit program. So it will remain consistent across different environments, and based on the environment that it is being triggered, it will pick up the appropriate file. So that is the best way how you can achieve this, right? So how can we achieve this? So we can achieve this using something called as a type safe config. So a type safe config basically allows us to store configuration data into separate files, and then we use the keywords to include such configurations to those files, right? We will see how we can work on this. Now this is for using this type safe, we need to download some jars, okay? So for doing the type safe, we have to download some jar. So this is a jar that we need to download. This is again, I will paste this in your article section. So just use this URL, or you can just search for this com.typesafeconfig 1.3.4, and if you see here download session, you click on the download, and we want to download this jar. So click on this jar, right, and this will download this file for you. All right, so the config file is downloaded. So I'm going to copy this file, and I'm going to place this in the external jars that I have, right? So I'm going to create another folder here, and this folder would be let's name it as config. So I'm gonna place this folder or this particular jar here. So we have downloaded this jar. Now there are two common ways of reading a configuration file. So we create a configuration file and then we put some data in it, and using that we will read the appropriate data, right? So there are two ways how we can use the configuration file or read the data from the configuration file. So one is basically application.config. Okay, so under resources, so you see the folders here, right? Under this resources, source main resources, you can create two files, right? You can use any one of them. So we will see both of them in action one by one. So you can either use application.config or you can use application.properties. So these are basically files. So if you right click on this and say new, and you see file here, give the name. So you have to give application.config.conf or application.properties. All right, so the naming should be correct. So this is if you look at this, so the names should match. This should be application.properties because Spark will basically look for these files to load the configuration data. All right, so when do we use application conf, or when do you use application properties, right? Okay, so application.config, we generally use this one we generally use when you specify some multiple interrelated configuration, right? So if you open this, this is the data that I have. So these are basically this is the data basically related to a particular project. They are related to each other, right? So in this project, for Spark, we have the application name, the master that we are loading it, what is the log level. And then for the same project, I'm using a MySQL database, and these are the data for the MySQL, right? I have the username, the password, and the URL, right? And if you look at application.properties, this is used when you have set of unrelated configurations. Like for example, here what I have here is like these are all related to the dev environment. This is related to my production environment, and this is basically your input output file, right? Some files that I have, right? So you can use either of this to read the configuration data. Now first what we will do is we'll do a simple program to see how we can read this data and then print this data. So that way we will understand how the data is read and what is it printing, right? And once we understand that, we'll take a step further and then we'll write a Spark program and then utilize one of these configuration files, and then we will use it to read the files from development environment or production environment based on where it is running. All right, okay. So the first thing is basically I need to so first thing, I have this object, I have this main function, right? Now for using the configuration file, I have mentioned that we need to download the jar, right? We have already downloaded the jar. We need to add this jar to our program. So right click, build path, right? Configure build path. You have to add external jars, right? So go to the location where you have the configuration file, the configuration jar. So this is where we have, so open, apply and close, right? Now we have the configuration jar in the project. Okay, all right. So in order to use that, we need to import a class. We will say com dot type safe dot config dot, we have to import two classes here. One is config, the other is config factory, right? So we need to use both of them. So the first thing that we will do is we will say config factory dot invalidate caches. So this is the first thing that we do. So what it means is this basically makes sure that every time it will read the fresh copy of the configuration file. Now this is important because if let's say we make some changes to the configuration file, it should basically reflect those configuration well rather than reading it from the cache memory. So that is the reason why we use this config factory dot invalidate cache. So every time we make some changes to the configuration file, it will read those changes, it will read the fresh copy rather than reading from the cache. All right. Okay. Now let's first work with this one, application.configuration. Okay, so I'll do a simple println to specify that we are basically working with on application.conf. all right, so now in order to read this, right, so let's take a config, right, so we'll say val config variable, and then I have to use config factory dot passive load. Now I have to load the configuration file. So what is my configuration file here? I want to load application.config. So this is what I want to load. So Spark will basically look for this file here under resources, and it will load this file, right? And from here, if you look at this file, right, let me open this file. Okay, we have the file here open, right? So this is basically has the my project details, right? So we need to get this my project details. So we want to read the my project details. So here I would say get config, and I would say my project. All right, so I'm reading the my project. So my project is basically all this data. All right, now this will have all the details of this file, application.config, basically this my project tag. Now I want to print some data from here, so I would say println. Now I will use this variable config dot get string. All right, and I basically want to get let's say, let's go back here. So I want this data. What is application name? So application name is basically inside Spark, right? So I have to say Spark. This should be in quote, right? I have to say Spark dot inside this. What do I want? I want the application name. So my application name is my application. So I'm basically reading this data, right? So this is kind of a key value configuration. So I want to know what is the application name. So this is under Spark. So I would say Spark dot application name, right? Similarly, let's say I want to know the master. So I can also say, let me do another println here. Here it should be Spark dot master, right? So this is the value that I want. All right. So now what this will do is this will basically go and search here, and under Spark dot application name, what is the value? My app. So that value will be assigned. Similarly, under master, what is the value? This is the value, right? See. All right. So similarly, I can get the values from here, right? MySQL, what is the username and password? So I can say MySQL dot username, MySQL dot password. So let me also do that. So I will say this is a MySQL, and I want to get the username, and here I want to get the password. All right. Okay, so save this. Okay, before I run this program, let me explain this one more time. So we have an application.config where we give the details related, they are interrelated. Now, for example, this is I am naming this as my project. So under my project, I have two things. One is related to Spark, one is related to MySQL. So inside Spark, I have to give some configuration details, like this is a key value. So for what is the application name? My application name equal to this, my master equal to this, my log level equal to this. Now you can give something else, like, you know, my input file is this, my output file is this, or my locations, all those details. But here we are just limiting to this value, and then we are taking a database. I have MySQL under this. This is my URL, this is my username, and this is my password. Now instead of instead of basically now what is the advantage here is, instead of giving the values, like instead of saying, hey, this is a username or this is a password, you can get those details here. So anytime if you want to make any changes, you don't have to touch your Spark program, rather you can just make changes to the configuration file, right? So this is like parameterizing, better way. You don't have to make any changes to your Spark program, rather a simple change here should suffice. All right. Okay, so in order to read this data, right, we have to load this configuration file. So this we have done here. So we are loading into this variable, and to read this data, we have to say config.getString and whatever we want to read. So if you want to read this master, so this is under Spark, so we have to space spark.masters, and that will give you this result local. If you want to if you want to know what is the username, you have to go mysql.username. It will give the username value, which is the root. All right, so that is what we are trying to achieve. So I will save this first, and I'll go ahead and run this program. All right, so as you can see, this application.config, you have spark.application name is my application, master is local, then username is root, and password is mysql. So we are able to read the data from the configuration file. Instead of passing the file names or anything within the code, we are basically reading it from a configuration file. All right, so this is how you can read from your application.conf, right? There is another thing, right? Application.property. So let's also read from that. So I'll take another println statement, and here this is application.properties. Okay, so let's open this. So what do we have here? So we are saying dev.execution mode is equal to local, the input based directory for dev, the output based directory for dev, then we have the production details. So if I want to know, let's say if I'm running my code in development, then I have to read this directory, right? This is the input directory, this is the output directory. If I'm running my code in production, I have to read this directory. This is the input directory and this is the output directory. I don't have to explicitly mention these details in a Spark submit. Internally, I can write a code such that if it is running in dev, it should pick up these details. If it is running in production, it should pick up these details, right? So that we will see in a little while. Before that, let's see how we can read these files, right? So it is important for us to know how we can read this data. Okay, so now similar to the application.configuration, what we can do is we can use the same command, right? Same code. So we can use a configuration.load, configuration factory.load, and let me change this to config1. Now instead of application.config, we have to read application.properties. All right, and again you can use the same println, and we say config1, right? Config1 dot, now get string, obviously same code, nothing different. So what is this we want to get? Let's say I want to know what is the input location, input base, right? So I would use this. So I am gonna go ahead and use this. So this is for my input base directory in dev. Now similarly, if I want to know what is my output base directory, so I can simply go here and say, hey, this is my output base directory. So I'm just gonna copy this. I can do the same for my production. I can read the input base directory, I can read the output base directory, right? So this is my production input directory, and similarly I can also do for production output directory. So this is my production output directory, right? Okay, so what this means is when you say get string of dev.input.base directory, it will search for this based in dev.input.base directory and the value which is equal to this. So this is the value. So this is what it will retrieve. So it will retrieve here, and we are printing this. Similarly, we will do for these things. All right. We also have something called as input and something called as output. So let us also print those. So now I'm going to copy this and say print config, right, get string, and here the key is basically input, and let me also do for output. So I'm going to copy this here, and I'm going to copy here, and I'm going to change this to output, right? I will save this. So it's very similar to how we read application.config. We are reading application.properties, and we are getting the string, we are passing the key here, and this will retrieve the value for us. All right, so I'm going to save this, and let me first run this program. So seems to me there is some error. So it says config exception. Okay, so here it should not be dot get config. So if you look at this, we copied exactly what we had from the application.conf. So here we have used the same my project, but if you look at application.conf properties, there is nothing called as my project. It is basically there in this application.conf, right? So that's a copy issue. So we should remove this. So we don't need to load this, or we need to get anything, because it is basically not under anything, right? So we don't have any parent tag or anything like this. These are basically something which is interrelated, right? So we have removed this, and I am saving this again, and let me run it now. This time hopefully there should not be any issue. So we should have the configuration file read from application.conf. It should display all the data. Similarly, it should display all the data from application.properties. All right, so the data is now available. Now if you see here application.properties, so this is the dev bucket, this is my dev output folder, this is my production input folder, this is my production output folder, and then we are printing the input and output files. All right, so this is how you can use the application.properties or application.config to basically get the data, or basically get the configuration data from a particular file, from the files, right? So this is good. Now this is, we have basically try to understand how it is reading the data from your configuration file. Now the next step is to basically use one of this configuration file and develop a Spark application. Now we can either use either of these two files, application.conf or application.properties. So based on the requirement. So let's say our requirement is quite simple. So in dev we have a separate folder for source, we have a separate folder for target, and in production it's different. So when I run it in dev, it should pick up the dev folder, and when I run this in production, it should pick up the production folder. We will use a very simple program. We will read a file, we will write to that file, that's it. We're not going to make any transformation changes. And again, you can write your own transformations, whatever you want. It is not going to change the process, right? We are more concerned about how we can read the configuration data. So we will keep it that simple. And again, we have already seen a lot of transformations, and we'll still be seeing a lot of transformation. But to be precise, to the point, we just wanted to understand how we can leverage this application.properties to read the configuration data in different environments. All right, so for this purpose, what I will do is I will use the application.properties. So let me close this. All right, now in this, what I'll do is this, we have only a few values here. So we only have the input folder, output folder, right? Okay, so I'm gonna make some changes here. So let's say my input folder is under Cloudera. So this may let's say this would be datasets. This is dev input. All right, and maybe under Cloudera, output is under Cloudera, datasets, dev. Yep, this is output. Okay, let me also remove this. And similarly for production, what I have is Cloudera datasets. So instead of dev, I mark this as production, right? And similarly, let me also copy this here, and it should be output, right? So this is in my, so these files are basically in my HDFS, right? So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have these folders in our look in our HDFS. So I'm going to open my Cloudera here. So I'm going to basically do a HDF. I'm going to create this folders here. So I'm going to say mkdir. So let's create this folder. So I know this user datasets should be already there, but let me quickly check this if I have this dataset folder. Because if we don't have this dataset folders, we'll have to create those folders as well. All right. Okay. So it looks like I actually have this data, folders already created. So I have the datasets dev, I have datasets prod. I already have them created. So what I need to do is I need to create this directories inside it. Okay, so I'm gonna say, or maybe let me just check if I have anything in this. Okay, so yeah, we have input, we have output. Similarly, if I do this, we should have this folder. So I had already created this folders. So and the size is, there's nothing in this folder, so this is good. So just a refresher, if you want to create a folder, so you have say hdfs dfs mkdir, and then you have to give this. So for example, if you want to create this folder, you have to do this because it is already there for me. So there's no need to create something, but I'm just showing you that this is the way how you can create these folders, right? Okay, so we have this folders, we have the directories created. So now what we need to do is we need to copy some data. All right, so we need, because your input file, input data, so input directory should have your input files, and then we will load this data into the output directory. Okay, so for this, let me go to this home Cloudera, and under datasets we should have some files. All right, so let's copy this customers, and also let's copy orders, right? Okay, so let's copy the customers data to the dev environment and orders data to the production environment. Okay, so when I say production environment, basically this is your dev and this is your production. Just assume that because we are running on the same cluster, so we are using a single cluster, everything we are doing in the single node. But assume that this is a multi-node cluster, and this is basically your development folder, and this is your production folder. Just assume for the sake, right? So I'm going to copy this let's say categories, let's use categories. So I'm going to copy this category to the dev folder, and maybe let's copy this orders to the production environment. Now why I'm copying two different files is, so when we run the Spark program, we are going to develop one Spark program. So when we run the Spark program, and we should identify which data is getting generated, right? Whether it's categories or orders. So if it is reading categories data, then obviously we can justify saying that, hey, it is reading the data from the dev bucket or your dev folder. If it is reading the orders data, then we can identify, we can say, what, this is reading the data from production, right? That is the reason why we are using different folders, or we are using different file names instead of the same file name. All right. Okay, so all right, so what we will do is we are going to copy this data to our production and also your development or dev folder. So this is HDFS, right? So we need to copy the data from your local. So I will say copy from local, right? and this is basically under this folder. Under this I'm giving the full path again, so this is a better way to write your code, right? So categories, I want to copy this category, and I want to copy this category to this folder, right? All right, so I'm gonna copy this here, enter, the data will be copied there, and right. So okay, I already have the file here, but that is fine. So this is it, this is how you can copy this data. So let me also do a copy, and here I'm going to copy the orders, right? We want to copy orders, and let's copy this to our production, right? So I want to copy this here. Okay, so these are the commands that we use to copy this data from your local to your HDFS. Again, the file is exists, so let me do a HDFS and see what files we have here. So this is the production folder, so I should have orders.csv. This is good, and let me also check in my dev. So this should be -ls. Okay, so this should have the categories.csv file. Yes, we have the files. All right, so we have the files here, we have the files in dev, we have the files in your production, right? And we also have the application dot properties, right? We have them. So now we need to create a Spark program, and this Spark program basically need to read the data from an input folder and write the data to an output folder. So it is that simple. So if it is running in dev, it has to read the data from the input dev folder, which is basically your categories. If it is running the program in your production, it has to read the data from your production folder, which is basically your orders.csv. So we need to write this Spark program for that. All right, so for this we need to import the typezip config, right? So this is something that we need to import. We have the Spark session, everything set up, right? So yeah, now first thing that we want to do is we want to we want to say val config factory, we want to say config factory dot invalidate caches. So this is basically if there are any changes to your configuration file, it will read the fresh copy rather than reading your data from the cache, right? And I'm going to create a config here. I'm going to say config factory and dot load. So we need to load this. What this we want to load application dot properties, right? So we will use application dot properties. Make sure that your spellings are all correct, otherwise it will simply say that this is not found, right? So okay, all right, so now we have to read this data, right? So let's say if I want to read the data from my let's say development, right? So I'm gonna say read csv df, and I'm gonna say spark dot read dot format, and my format is csv, and option it has a header, right? So let me say header is true. So my header is true here, and yeah, and then I need to load this data, right? I need to load the path or the file, right? So here I have to say, now instead of passing the path as it is, what I will say is you can read this data from here, config.getString, right? Config.getString, and from here if I want to read this data from dev, so I have to give the dev folder. So I will say dev.input.base directory, right? So I'm going to simply use this. All right, now this is fine. Now what I will do is I will write this to a CSV. So I'm going to say csv df dot write and of course you have to give the format, and our format, let's keep it as CSV only, and again the options and everything. So our option is that header, right? And let's say if the file exists, we want to overwrite, right? So we want to give the mode. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to say save. Okay, and here again I'm going to use the same. So I'm going to read from this, and here what should be the directory? It should be dev.output.base directory, right? So this is great. Okay, now similarly this is for dev, right? This is for dev. Now similarly I have to do for production. So this is my prod. Okay, and I can copy the same thing here, right? No changes. I'm gonna copy the same thing. There are errors, but we will fix it in a while. So let's first basically make the changes. So we want to read the file from the production. So this is my production input, and this is my production output. Okay, cool. So now I have to so now when I'm running the program, I have to read the data from my dev. So I have to either read this, or I have to read my data from my production. So I have to either read this. So either one of them I have to read. So how do I tell my program that, hey, read just this one, right? So for that I can pass one argument in my Spark submit. So I can say, okay, my Spark submit, if I pass the argument dev, then it should read from here. It means that I'm running in dev. So if I pass an argument say prod, then I am basically specifying that, hey, this is running in production, so it will read the data from here. So for that I'll write a simple if condition here, right? So in my if condition I'll say this is my argument, so arg of 0. So I'm only passing one argument here, right? So if it is this one, then just execute this, right? Whatever is there in dev, so just do this. Okay, so okay, this should be here, right? So this should be here. Okay, so if my argument is dev, then you read the dev folder and you write to the dev folder. Similarly, if my argument is prod, then you read the data from my prod folder and you write the data to my prod folder, right? So simple. Okay, so no other changes. So what is the advantage here is, so if you have to write, if you have to use without the configuration file, right, what you have to do is you have to pass this this folder and this folder. So you have to give two arguments and developments, but if you take it to QA, you have to give two different arguments, right? So there is inconsistency. But here what we are doing is we are not giving this pass, rather we are just passing a single argument. I'm saying, hey, this is dev. So when you look at the Spark submit, you say, oh, this is running in dev, right? And then it should take this one. And if you pass production, then you say, hey, this is running in prod, so you have to take this one, right? So that is the reason. So we will save it. We will not be able to run this here, and so we will need to first save this, build this jar, and then we have to take this jar and we have to deploy it, right? So let's first do that. So right click on your project and then run as Maven build. Give your goal, should be, you can give any goal. So this is my goal, this is install, and it should build the jar soon. Yeah, so the jar is now built, and the target, I'll go properties, I'll open the folder and it will take me to the target directory. Let me just delete this. Again, this is 113 KB, so our program should be there, but because we are learning, so a good practice is to extract this and see if we have our folder. So we have, see, you can see here, right, application.config, application.properties, both of them are there. So this is a conf file, this is a properties file. So this is great. So again, if you want to check our program, so our program name is, let me cancel this, our program name is config file 2. So search for this, you have the config file too. So we have all our data available, right? So let me go back here, and this is the data that we have. So I need to copy this data. I need to copy this jar to my edge node, right? So open your WinRecipe. All right. So where do we have this? So we have here. So go to this location, and of course you have this in external jars. So just drag and drop, right, override the existing file. So we have the jar, we copied the jar and we deployed this into our edge node. All right, now remember we also have, we also have an additional jar, right? So the jar which we use for type config, right, the jar that we downloaded for type config, so that is an external jar, so we need to send that jar as well, right? So where do I have that jar? So it should be under C, external jars, and I think okay, here, so this is the config jar, right? So here uh, on the external jars, right, I can create a new folder directory. I can say config, and I can copy this directory or this jar here, right? So this way we are basically copied both the jars. We copied the build jar, we copied the config jar. All right, so let me go back and verify this. So I am here, see external jars. So if I do an lsltr, so this is my jar, and then of course I have a config directory created, and if I do an lsltr, I should see this config jar, right? So we have the jars, everything ready. Now it is time for us to run the Spark submit. So first let's run the Spark submit in dev. So I will say Spark submit, and I'm gonna say master. Okay, before that I just wanted to verify if we have any data in the target, right? So let me go, if we have any data, so we will delete it. So that way we can verify if the data is first loaded into which directory, right? So this is the output directory, and this is for dev. So I'm gonna do nstr, and let me also copy this directory while that loads. So we have this data here, right? And I'll also check if we have the data here out in okay, this is again, I copied dev. All right, it looks like I forgot to make change to this, so this should be prod dot output. So let me first do an lsltr to see if we have the data. We have the data, so I made changes here. So let me run the jar again. So build this jar again, configure build path, sorry, I have to build this jar, right? So yeah, so come here, run as build this jar. I let's run this. Okay, so let's wait for the jar to run, to be built. Okay, so yeah, so we have the build. Now again I need to make sure that I go back, let's so this is my target directory. So I'm going to use this target directory here, and yeah, external jars. So let me copy it one more time. Okay, now we have everything. So let me go back, let me also delete this data here, right? So I'm gonna say htfs dfs hyphen rm. Okay, so let me also delete data from the production. So this is production, and let me delete the data. All right, so we have the data deleted. So what I will do is I am going to check it one more time. So okay, this is my output location for dev, and let's see if we have any data. We should not have any data. Yes, we don't have any data. We are all clear. So similarly, I will also check for my production. So see if we have any data here. So we should not have any data. So yeah, we don't have any data. So we are all clear. So let's run our Spark submit. So this is our Spark submit. I have to give the master. This is my local environment. So I'm going to give local, and yeah, we have to give the configuration file, right? So that is the jar that we have downloaded for type config. So I'm going to say spark driver extra class path, and I have to give the location. So what is that location that we have? Let's just go back here. This should be external jars. Let's say this is config. Okay, so this is where we have this jar. So we have to copy this path. So this is under this, and whatever you have, so you can give the full file name, but I'm just giving star because there's only one file, that's the one we want, so there's no confusion here, right? So the class, right? So class would be again your package name, and of course your object name, right? So what is my object? So this is a program that we want to run, right? So this is my object. Okay, and of course you have to give the path of your jar, right? So my jar is basically let's say this is my jar, and what is the name of my jar? So this is externals, right? So this is my jar name, and you have to give another argument, one arguments. We are running in dev, so let's give dev. Let's go ahead and execute, right? So the program is now getting executed, and once this program is executed, we should see that the data is being read from dev, and then it is loaded into the dev environment, the dev folder. So we should not have any data in your production, right? So that is what we want to verify. Okay, so we have the Spark program. It is now executed successfully. So I'm gonna go back, and let's do something, right? So all right, so let's check. So let me use this data. All right, so this is our output directory, right? So htfs dfs -ls, and this should have some data. It should have your categories data. Okay, so we have this data here, so we can do an htfs -cat, and you should be able to see this data. So this data should belong to your categories, right? So this is what we loaded, right? Okay, so at the same time our production directory was empty, right? So let me check if we have any data here. I should not have any data, because this actually picked up the dev, so we don't have any data, so this is cool. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the data again. So from here I'm going to delete the data. So I'm going to say htfs dfs -rm. So I'm going to delete everything from here. All right, and then I'm going to run the Spark submit again. So everything is deleted. If you want to verify again, you can do an endless, and then you will see that there is no data here, right? All right, so this is good. Now I'm going to go back, and I'm going to run the Spark submit here. So everything is same. The only change is here, instead of dev I will say prod, and then I will execute. Now what will happen here is it will pick up the prod buckets or the prod folders from your configuration file, and it will read the data from your production folder, input folder, and it will write the data to your production output folder, right? Normally what happens is you can put this as a scheduler in your controller or anything, and you can basically pass these arguments from the controller, but we are doing everything manually here, so we are passing this argument here. All right, anyways, that is the process. That's the gist of it, right? So okay, so we have this executed. So we have this executed. Now I'm gonna go and check the dev folder first. Where's my, okay, so let me go ahead. I'm gonna check my dev folder first. So because we have given production, we should not have any data here, right? There is no data. Now I'm gonna go and check my production folder. Now this is where we should find the data. So htfs dfs -ls, give the path, and you see we have the data, we have the file. So you can check the file contents using htfs-dfs.cat, and it will give, yeah, so this is basically about the order. You can see the complete, pending, ordered status and all, right. So this is how you run your programs in different environments. Now the advantage here is, if your production bucket has changed, or your production or your development folder has changed, the only place you have to make the change is you just go to this place, application.properties, and make this change. You don't have to touch your Spark program, and also you don't have to specify the path, in your Spark submit. It looks a lot cleaner, right? So this is, let me open this Spark submit program again. So if you use this Spark submit program, as you can see, right, we're not passing anything here except for that environment variable, right, whether it's dev or production. We're not passing the input file name, we're not passing the output file name, we're not passing anything else. So this way we can basically parameterize our files. We can parameterize the how it can read from different environments. So I hope this session was helpful and clear, and I will see you guys in my next class.